Should we move on then to the Protege?
Yes, and talking of foreshadow, we've talked about 3 of director Martin Campbell's films on this podcast before. And while we were really quite positive about his 2 Bond outings, GoldenEye and Casino Royale, the last time we covered him, we were considerably less enthusiastic about the disappointing and tone-deaf Jackie Chan vehicle, The Foreigner. The star here is Maggie Q. Rescued from a bloodbath in Vietnam, the country, not the war, as a child by Samuel L. Jackson's Moody Dutton, a hitman who knows he's a bad guy but makes up for it by only killing bad people. And while that's not exactly moral, it's certainly on a firmer footing there than The Foreigner's bombs or precision weapons, right? And also, to its credit, isn't based on a book called The Chinaman, which very much is the issue. Moody becomes a new father to the child, Anna, and raises her as his protege, and the 2 work together finding those who don't want to be found, and offing them. But they're bad guys, okay? After an initial mission, in which badass credentials are firmly established, Moody presents Anna with a new mission, though this time with the aim of simply finding a target. This target, though, seemingly doesn't want to be found, or at any rate someone doesn't want him to be found, and Moody and Anna become the targets themselves. Moody is taken out of the picture, and the protege must become the master, and Anna must follow the trail back to Vietnam, somewhere she swore she would never return. Then there's some fighting, and some flirting, and some fun, with some rather brutal deaths, and some truths are uncovered. The Protege is Campbell's first film since The Foreigner, 4 years ago, and it certainly hews somewhat closer to that than the continuing adventures of wee Jimmy Bond. But it's vastly more successful, and how could it not be? Samuel L. Jackson giving speeches, fun and flirty scenes between Maggie Q and Michael Keaton. Though, just don't think about the film asking you to believe the 70-year-old Keaton going toe-to-toe with Q and not being left a greasy smudge in the scenery. A decent story hook and some perhaps unremarkable but slightly produced action sequences. The film is slight, at times so thin it falls apart, but it's a pretty fun ride for the most part. There are flaws, but the main one is the unnecessary flashbacks to show the childhood trauma that made Maggie Q Anna's a badass. The film would have been much better served by swapping those out for more scenes of Anna actually being badass, especially because Q is both entertaining and believable in that role. The Protege is destined to be forgotten, and quickly, but it'll satisfy pretty well while you're watching it, and that's just fine. There are certainly worse ways you could spend 110 minutes, like, the last film we spoke about.
Not for the first time in this podcast, I will say that this is a film that doesn't do anything that I particularly dislike, and seems like a film that I just should have liked more. It didn't grab me all that much. It was relatively entertaining for the time I spent with it, and I'm already more or less forgetting most of it. Yeah, it is full of actors that I like. It's got decent action, it has, solid direction behind it and all that as well, and the story's adequate enough to keep it going. I feel like I should have been more into this, and it was just fine. And, that is, of course, fine, but it puzzles me a little bit that I didn't like it more, which is perhaps a bit strange. So I kind of give it a guarded recommendation, and other than that, I don't think I've got a great deal to add about it. I agree with pretty much everything you're saying in your review. So it's it's perfectly fine. I have already more or less forgotten about it, as you say, but it is an enjoyable, entertaining enough little way to spend some time if you're in the market for an action film. It is certainly one of the better ones we've spoken about recently that I can't think of much that's better than it. So yeah, give it a go, but don't expect it to be blowing your socks off.
Yeah, it's not one of those things you should go to pains to find, but I just find it solidly enjoyable.
Yeah.
It really is slight, it's forgettable, but solid enjoyable. And the kind of the film which I never really got on with 80s and 90s Michael Keaton, but modern Michael Keaton I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
And I said he's 70. He doesn't look 70.
No.
He's looking good for his age. Although again, obviously, he would just be grounded to dust by Maggie Q in an action fight. But, so I like him a lot, and the interplay between him and Maggie Q is really fun. There's a real chemistry there.
Yeah, all kind of like more like a kind of I don't know, like 40s kind of film where they're bantering back and forward. That's probably a high spot for me as well. Yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's slightly enough produced. It doesn't have the problems that came with The Foreigner and Samuel L. Jackson at one point giving speeches, because that obviously doesn't get old. It's always fantastic fun. So yeah, it's, and we're repeating ourselves again, but forget all, but it's solidly entertaining. I don't regret watching it at all, although would I ever watch it again? It's unlikely. But I might even remember it exists.
I had no idea this film existed until you posted the list for this episode in the Slack channel, Scott. And the only thing I can say is, remember how I said it was shallow before? I want to give this film special kudos for whoever photoshopped the poster and managed to make Maggie Q look weird. That's all I have to say about that.
Thanks for your input.
You're welcome.
I'll have you back.
That's free.